How are you?
Oliver, I am doing excellent. I'm very excited for the new year.
Well, you're kind of reminding me of Tony Robbins today. You
Oh
know Tony
no.
Robbins? Well, one, you've got all these goals and you got all your stuff together. And two, we talked about doing an interview and you said, well, when is now a good time? So I like that. So we fired up the computers and here we are.
Yeah, we're getting right down to action to talk.
We're taking
Taking action
action,
to talk.
just like
Yeah.
just like Tony. I really
Yeah.
liked the petition you sent me, and I signed it and sent it back right away. So RFK, we need to get him in there.
Yeah, it was just a petition to get people to kind of help, you know, you know, uh, the higher ups in the Maha camp to promote RFK for the Health and Human Services director to bridge the gap between Maha and gender ideology, anti-gender ideology fighters. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful we can get down to business this year.
Yeah, I would love to see people, if I could be so bold, put in jail for performing these surgeries on young people. So there's no informed consent, and they're really scarring people for lives or for their life.
Right. And we've made great strides in the preventative side of things, like banning transition for minors and having more awareness for parents to have authority. But in terms of actually helping the victims or their families, there's very few resources. So my hope with the Maha is not just prevention of these disasters, but then getting actual medical and mental health care to detransitioners and their families.
Yeah, for sure. The last time we've spoken since then, but the last time we saw each other, you came out to Iowa and testified at a public hearing on Iowa's "What Is a Woman" bill. You marched through the trans cult and gave your 2 minutes, which was incredibly powerful. And then we had a reception with legislators, which I know is impactful. Anytime you can get someone with your knowledge and background and experience to talk one on one or one on 12, a dozen legislators, it makes a difference because then it's a real story and they've met somebody that's been through it. So thank you so much for coming out and doing that. That was so brave and important.
Well, yeah, thank you. It's my first time to Iowa. And it was my first time testifying in person. So that was a big kind of milestone for me. And I write about it in my book, and it's important to take that kind of action, in the court system.
For sure. Can you talk about the lawsuit?
Oh, my lawsuit?
Yeah, somebody asked me about it the other day, and there's a lot of hope that those, yours and Chloe's and other detransitioners lawsuits will take root and go through.
Well, I appreciate you asking, but unfortunately, I don't really have a lawsuit anymore.
Oh,
Yeah, there's the most common issue for detransitioners is the statute of limitations. So, like, I was at the time that we had spoken and met, I was formulating this and I was hopeful that we could have a case. And the lawyers, described it as being medical battery, medical neglect, all these different charges. And they said that the case was valid, but we just wouldn't be able to bring the case because of the statute of limitations. So they've had to turn away a ton of people. And it was really disappointing because I'm not sure that I'll ever see any type of legal justice. And I know that my case would have been a strong addition to the public discourse around this. And so, really, the only sort of option for me is if we get some type of bills passed to extend the statute of limitations for medical malpractice. I know a couple states have been trying, and I've been working with a couple states to try to formulate that sort of thing. But so far in Wisconsin and Illinois, where I was transitioned, there hasn't been any extension of the limitation statute. So that would be the only way. So yeah, it's very disappointing. Sadly, I don't have any sort of legal recourse at this time.
Are there any other states that have extended that statute of limitations?
I don't know of any that actually have extended it. I don't remember the names of the states that we were even, proposing bills to do that, but it's definitely on our minds. Um but I think more focus right now is going into prevention because in a lot of ways that's easier, to just ban child transition and try to get that going. There's more support to do that than to try to go into the more difficult weeds of, helping survivors. And it's harder to change legislation that's already in place than to just create new legislation, just in general. So, the child transition bills are really just the beginning of this. A lot of people kind of have it backwards and they think that this is going to be the end of gender ideology. I really don't see it that way at all. I view the child transition bans as the lowest hanging fruit that we can access to get momentum, but there's going to be years and years and probably decades worth of damages where these lawsuits are going to unfold for years, and the victims and their families are going to need justice and resources. So, obviously, prevention is extremely important, and we've been very successful so far with that. Maybe this year we will get a Supreme Court ruling, and maybe even Trump will enact some federal legislation. So that's great. But there's still a lot of people that aren't currently getting any form of justice. So
Yeah,
we'll have to hope and see.
that's unfortunate. Um, so would you mind, I know we did a pretty, an hour interview when you were here last year and really kind of went through your story, but would you share a short version of your story with everyone who's listening now for the first time?
Sure. So, I grew up a tomboy, a very quirky kid. I was diagnosed on the autism spectrum when I was 11. And so I grew up in that typical environment in the Midwest where it was a, Democrat, liberal, left-leaning family, very open to my personality, but unfortunately, I didn't really receive the resources that I needed in the home, in terms of parental, let's say, maturity. There was abuse in the home that was chronic, and I suffered trauma from that. I suffered psychological and emotional abuse, and then also some forms of neglect as well. And then in the school system and the medical and mental health system, I also fell through the cracks because I'm this, articulate, intelligent, doing well in school, academically kid, but then I'm struggling socially and emotionally. And because of these issues, when I was a teenager, I was easy prey to get indoctrinated into the woke cult in general, and then specifically the gender cult. So I found the gender cult online on Tumblr when I was about 15. And at first it seemed revolutionary, it seemed liberatory. I felt like I could be myself. I was identifying as non binary and queer. And I felt like this was the path to being accepted as I am as this quirky person. But I also had a lot of confusion, a lot of self esteem issues from the abuse. And I really just didn't feel lovable as a human being, just very typical abuse stuff. But then because of the woke paradigm, I was taught to see myself as not a female. I was taught to disassociate from my body. And I began having gender dysphoria and then really questioning and ruminating for several years if I was transgender. And I was suicidal. So I thought this was the only way to find salvation, basically, and save my life. And I believed the myth that if I don't transition, I'll kill myself. And so I ended up transitioning socially and then medically at the age of 18. 19, I was given testosterone in a 1-hour appointment at a LGBT informed consent clinic. which means that I just went in and said, I'm trans and I would like testosterone. And they were like, here you go. Good luck. Even though I had, hormonal issues, I had a lot of mental issues. And then very shortly after only being on hormones for 7 months, I had my breasts cut off in a gender affirming double mastectomy. And I was actually suicidal the day of the surgery. And it just didn't matter because the myth says that if you're suicidal, that means that you must really need the transition, quote unquote, care. So the trans ideology has circular reasoning, what is a woman? Anyone who identifies as a woman. What is gender dysphoria? Basically anything. It's kind of just uh, used as a panacea for any type of angst in any way. And so I was medically mutilated at the age of 20, and I really had no ability to consent to that at the time. I was suicidal and really didn't understand any long-term health complications. I was just in survival mode, getting by day to day. And so life continued to get worse after the surgery. And I coped very hard with hard drugs, and I was just my life was getting worse and spiraling out of control. So I debated if I should kill myself or not, and I kind of decided that if I hadn't killed myself by that point, by the age of 22, then I probably wasn't going to have the courage to do it or the guts to do it or whatever. And so I started to take some responsibility and just say, okay, what can I possibly do? Obviously, the transition didn't help, and I'm not getting any other type of help, so I need a new approach. So I went in, got a full psychological evaluation just to see like what is my baseline reality? Is there anything else that I can figure out of what's wrong with me and what to do? And that's when I was diagnosed with PTSD from child abuse and also from the transition itself. So I actually got more trauma from the so-called medical treatment that was supposed to cure me. And that's when I woke up and I realized that it had all been a lie. My trauma had never been healed. I was still just the same traumatized girl that I'd always been, except now my body was mutilated and I was disassociating. So that was kind of the beginning of my awakening. And then I ended up getting real therapy from people who did not affirm my delusions and who helped me to get my life back on track. And for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been a very outspoken advocate for detransitioners. And then now that it's kind of arisen to more of a mainstream level, or at least mainstream on the alternative media, I should say, it's still not accepted in any sort of leftist who primarily own the media. But now I'm here today and obviously have my book. I have a memoir. It'll be the first detrans memoir ever released um, later this year, Surviving the Trans Myth. And I'll go into far more detail in that book, but that's kind of the short version of my story.
Well, thank you so much, and it's amazing that you've taken such a terrible and horrid experience and turned it into such a positive in that you're helping other people on such a huge scale that may be confused or may be going through the same thing, your voice really is impactful. Um, so there's a few things that I took note of. One, you said that you got testosterone after a 1 hour visit and self diagnosis. And I think I remember 10 months ago when we first spoke, that was a professor that recommended that doctor to you.
Yeah, that was a transgender identifying woman. She was a female to male professor of a class I was taking called the Sociology of Sexuality.
Oh, man.
So it was a very queer class. And of course, I'm over here just very interested in sex and gender and wanting to learn about evolutionary psych and all that, um, and I did learn about some very interesting things with history and sex, but it was also queer coded. So it was very much affirming of delusion. And I went into to talk to her about some of my gender issues and struggle because I was identifying as a gay man, which never really works out. I don't advise doing it because I was a straight woman, and
Right, right.
I wanted to have love, I wanted to have romance in a very female typical way. I wanted to have like a monogamous relationship and, and intimacy and everything, but it just wasn't happening because I was just too traumatized and I was pretending to be a gay man. So I went in to talk to her, and she wasn't really helpful because she was actually a lesbian. So we had a nice conversation about like my penis envy, essentially, if you use a Freudian term, the
Oh
penis envy
man.
that I had. And then she was like, "Well, I just use a strap on with my wife, and that works for me." And I'm like, "Well, I'm actually like androphilic. I'm actually attracted to the male body. Like, so that's not really gonna
Well, and
do
that's
anything for me."
that's just that's insane, and that's one of the things they talk about in this book, The Gender Trap. This is actually published by Gays Against Groomers. It's by Carla Curtis, but right in the beginning, they talk about how it's so, you know, we talk about, oh, gender is a social construct, or the the typical men like these things, women like these things, and if you like the things that women are supposed to like, then that's supposed to be okay, but now it means you're a woman in a man's body, right? So they flipped that on its head. It's very sexist in a way. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a just a rebranding of the reality that we have sexual dimorphism, right? And there's a male biology and a female biology, and male psychology and female psychology. But overall, males and females are a lot more similar than they are different. So of course, there's always going to be females that and males that have, sex atypical interests or personality structures. And so I, believed that I was so masculine and, and so not feminine. But then looking back, yes, I was non-conforming, but overall I was obviously a female, and I was actually a lot more feminine than I thought.
Right,
And so the ideology, instead of saying, "Hey, Laura, you're fine as you are, you're a quirky girl. Here's how we can give you some social skills and some confidence to be able to embrace your sexuality and embrace being a straight woman who's kind of quirky." Instead, they were like, all quirky straight women who have issues with their bodies are actually men. And so it's
right.
actually very misogynistic what it says. Obviously, it says the same thing to males as well.
Well, and what you're describing there, which is common sense, which is how it should have been handled, they're trying to label as conversion therapy now. And
Right.
there are some groups, there's one here in Iowa, um, that have had success with getting city councils to ban conversion therapy, quote unquote, which is just basically a psychologist being able to do their job and not affirming someone's self diagnosis.
Yeah, it's insidious. It's one of the things that frustrates me the most as someone who is a enjoyer of therapy and who, has done some coaching, and everyone says I should be a therapist, and I just have like a therapist energy, I guess.
You do.
Um I do, and I'm like, it's so frustrating because therapy has helped me so greatly, and accepting myself and then examining my unconscious drives, and like I've done psychoanalysis, I've done many different forms of therapy, and all of them have helped except for gender affirming therapy
Right,
because
right,
gender affirming therapy is actually reality denying therapy. And
right,
so it's just, colluding with a patient's disordered thinking, which is the opposite of any, wisdom of the therapy profession. And so for them, these therapists and these mental health professionals that want to help patients that have gender dysphoria, they're not able to do their jobs and actually give the patients the awareness or tools to help them out of their dysfunction. It's just so evil.
It
It's
is, and
awful.
it's even in Iowa. I mean, I met a psychiatrist here in Iowa, and he said he was really kind of a unicorn in his profession, and that he actually gave therapy to someone who was having gender doubts or gender dysphoria, and help them get to the root causes. But most of the profession is just in that affirm and assist model, where they're like, oh, you feel like you're a girl? Well, you must be. Let's help you transform and be your best self, How is that going to change? Isn't that a problem at the board level, at the, the national whatever for psychology and
Y-
psychiatry?
Yes, this is a enormous issue that all of the institutions are captured. So the, American Academy of Pediatrics, the American um I'm trying to remember basically all of the psychiatric, all of the mental health for both children and adults are captured in this ideology. So there's a couple very vocal, very fringe activists that, of course, are the squeaky wheels that are getting the grease, and they're demanding within their institutions, within HR, within these licensing boards and regulatory boards, they're advocating for the radical stances. And because it sounds inclusive and it sounds good, these, well-intentioned, but, kind of cowardly or even just ignorant or apathetic, um, colleagues of theirs are saying, oh, yes, this must be a good idea. Let's implement this. So I don't even think it's the majority of practitioners that fervently understand or believe in this, but there's sheep going along with whatever the fringe activists who are writing their policies do. And, I know many people that they're now aware of this and they will report back to me, like school counselors or other people, that they're getting trainings because they have ongoing trainings. So maybe, 10, 20, 30 years ago in their initial study, none of this was around, obviously. And so they were just doing their normal jobs with existential wisdom. But because they're required to have ongoing trainings and update their understanding, now all this radical stuff is coming in the last 10 or 15 years. And they're just like, oh, I guess this is just how this is more wise, or this is what the research says. And it's all being pushed by WPATH, who do not have a scientific basis and are a radical activist organization. And once we understand that it's coming at this sort of policy level, it's frustrating. And I mean, how do we fight that? Well, we need other organizations to stand up against this and to have research, which is very difficult to do. And we need to create precedents either from legal cases or research, or enough individuals standing up and petitioning and lobbying within the organizations to say, hey, this policy is not scientifically founded, it's experimental, and we need to stop that, or we're going to stop funding this organization. And it's hard
Yeah.
because they are very well funded.
Yes, they are. They get Soros money.
Yep.
So, ask the American School Counselor Association. There was Courage is a Habit. I think it's courageisahabit.org or something like that. They actually did reports on ASCA on their and had videos of their conferences and went to their conferences. And they were really pushing all of this on school counselors, on the training, on the social emotional learning, gender identity, all these things. So, you have all these counselors that are being trained to, find the kid that's confused and encourage them, in their life saving, gender affirming care. And I use air quotes if you're listening, because they totally turn that on its head. It's really mutilation, medicalization, gender denying care.
Right.
And
And, that's
WPATH,
why.
the WPATH files, right?
Right.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
really blew the whistle on that. And the American College of Pediatricians came out with their report that really refuted all the bold claims the WPATH was making, especially about suicide. That whole, well, would you rather have a dead daughter or a live son, or a live daughter or a dead son? Well, that's a total lie. They proved that there's more likelihood of suicide after transition. Is that correct?
Yeah, we don't have a ton of research, but there's some indication that suicide ideation and suicide risk is actually higher after the
Right.
medicalization, especially the genital surgery,
Sure.
especially for males, which
Uh,
makes sense because males tend to enact suicide at higher rates than females, like actually do more lethal attempts. And it's the males that are taking these more radical genital surgeries. So it makes
yeah,
sense that they would be the population that would then actually, be more suicidal.
I
And
read it.
also it's common sense, like these procedures aren't actually treating your mental health condition, it's a placebo effect. And
Yeah.
that honeymoon phase wears off. And then you're just left with a lot of medical problems on top of the dysfunction that you already had.
And really, the way you described it to me before was and Chloe Cole as well, is that if you decide, well, this was terrible, this was a bad decision, there's no medical help after that.
Yeah, there's really no medical resources because a detransitioner has two options. They can try to go back to the practitioners are so-called specialists in gender medicine. So they try to go back to the people that hurt them. I mean, you're basically going back to your abuser. That doesn't tend to work out very well. And oftentimes they'll go back and be told that they can't help them or they'll be ghosted because the people feel probably some shame and guilt, and also they don't know what to do for this patient. All they know is to affirm, give them the mutilation, and then once they're mutilated, be like, all right, I did a great job and I'm a good person and I just saved this person's life. Good luck. They have no preparedness. And partly it's not their fault. I mean, again, they're sheep, right? A lot of them. So they're trained to only do this. They're not trained to have any protocols for how to
Yeah, at
deal with a
some point
detransitioner.
people have to wake up though. It really reminds me of the COVID protocol and doctors just following the protocol handed down to them from drug companies basically, and
Mhm.
administrations. We had some of them that said, "Hey, this is not right. We're gonna give them this protocol that with ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and you know uh, all a huge range of vitamins and other medications that really helped save lives." But those people were ousted and sometimes fired and lost their medical license and everything else. So I don't know how that works in this situation, but people need to wake up, I mean, and stand up.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a lot of cowardice out there, and I try to be as psychologically generous as possible to these people's motivations, right? And try to understand because I know what it's like to live that way, and I know what it's like to be in the delusion. And it took
Oh,
a long
sure.
time to wake up from it. But obviously, at the end of the day, these people are responsible for causing iatrogenic harm. Like a patient comes in with a healthy body and they leave with a mutilated body, someone needs to be held accountable for that. And I am tired of the victim blaming narratives that I hear constantly, that, oh, you just asked for it. Well, yeah, if a delusional schizophrenic person is like, I want to chop off my arm and that'll make me feel better and validate my soul, you know, they're not given that. So why not the same applied here, you know? It's not the
And
victim's fault.
no, definitely not. There needs to be true informed consent. And these, people that are in those situations need to be really treated as a patient that, finding the background issues, finding the depression issues, figuring out what the root cause of these things are. I mean, most people would think that's common sense, but it's been turned completely upside down. I read about one of the surgeries you mentioned on males in Miriam Grossman's book Lost in Transnation. I I had to I was listening to it on Audible, and I have the paper or the hardback as well. But I had to pause the audio for a little bit and take a break because it was so heavy and really made me sick. I mean, and the challenges that these young men were having in the care, the long term issues they were having was just atrocious. So how that could be life saving, gender affirming care, I just can't understand that.
Pocket filling surgeon care.
Pocket filling, yeah, but you know your Mercedes and your boat and your your third mortgage
Yep.
affirming care. You know, what do you think about the age limit? Because, you know, we always say, oh, 18 is an adult, right? Well, when we drafted, our bill was drafted here in Iowa that banned gender surgeries in minors under 18. I had shared it with an OB that I know that's a little bit maybe liberal. And he said, I don't have any problem with this bill, but the age should be 25. He said, you know, the brain's not fully developed and these kids don't know what they're doing. I mean, to have that type of life changing, irreversible damage done to you under 25 is not okay. What are your thoughts
Yeah,
on that?
I was transitioned from 19 to 20. So again,
Right.
I was an adult, right? But I couldn't even legally buy alcohol. I obviously was suicidal. I wasn't functioning. I was not living an adult life, right?
Well, you can't smoke a cigar here in Iowa if you're under
Oh,
21.
really?
Right.
I've just gotten into smoking cigars recently,
Yeah,
so
me
I'm
too.
like, yeah,
Next
yeah,
time
I'll
you're
have to
in
talk about
town, I'm
that.
going to invite you to our cigar group.
Oh, I would love that. I would love
We
that.
meet on Tuesdays.
Oh yeah, I'm down for a cigar any day of the week. Um, but yeah, just goes to show like can't buy alcohol, can't buy tobacco, can't rent a car, there's all these different things and just, socially we know that an 18-year-old has more freedom, but also they're not very smart and they're not very wise and they're not very experienced and there's definitely some variation and there's some 18-year-olds that have their shit together but most don't, and it takes a few years from like 18 to 25 to really figure out who you are and to go through that adult formation, and gain those life skills to make long-term decisions as well as the brain development. But regardless, to be honest, it doesn't really matter if you're 25 or if you're 50. If the procedure doesn't have a scientific basis and doesn't have the outcome of health and wellness that it claims to give, then that's experimental, that's not actually medicinal. And so at best, it's a cosmetic procedure that has extreme effects. And so there's precedence for cosmetic procedures that are not medical. So I would like to see this entire paradigm of medicine be classified as cosmetic. Therefore, it wouldn't be covered by insurance. Therefore, there would be different regulations around it. And it wouldn't be administered or allowed to be administered by mental health professionals. So yeah, I think 18 is a good place to start. I think that's again the lowest hanging fruit, but it doesn't set a good I mean, there's already precedents set in medicine and cosmetic that it doesn't matter the age. It's about if the patient can consent meaningfully, and we've already seen that these patients cannot meaningfully consent. And how can you even consent to something that's experimental? Like if you're going to go through some kind of experimental drug trial, that's a whole other set of regulations around that is a lot more strict than what gender affirming procedures are doing today. So no, I don't think that just because you're 18 that it means you can suddenly consent. If the procedure is unscientific and doesn't have any research base, then all ages cannot consent to that meaningfully.
Exactly. Exactly. You know, you talked about it being akin to a cult, and I've heard that over and over, the trans cult. This, can you explain that?
Yeah, I've pretty much every single detransitioner and desister I've heard it refers to it as a cult because what we would call this would be a non-centralized cult, meaning that it's not centralized around an authority figure like a cult leader. Like that's what we would normally think of, some kind of guru cult leader. This is a non-centralized cult, meaning that it's spread out and you're pretty much worshiping the ideology. And it's very spread out because it's digital. It's a digital cult primarily. And so I stumbled into this cult of ideology on Tumblr when I was 15, and all these cultists are dogmatically, you know, uh, reinforcing each other's self destructive behavior, and they're also controlling each other's behavior. There's no specific cult leader that's dictating orders, but you're worshiping the ideology and you are policing each other's behavior and even each other's thoughts. And so we view it as a cult because of the so many overlaps between a traditional cult where there's reinforcers of, the strict rules that you had to adhere to. Anyone who questions the cult or questions the ideology will be punished and will be excommunicated. And so detransitioners are ex-cultists. We are heretics. I view this as a spiritual body modification cult. So we are heretics of this, spiritual, religious sort of entity. And even without a specific cult leader, we can see the authoritarian measures that are taken by other cultists. And once you question it or once you leave, you are mocked, you are shamed, you are shunned, you're excommunicated, you lose your entire friend group. And then where you left, well, the only people now talking about this are the conservatives. And so it sort of reinforces the cultist belief, unfortunately, because they're like, oh, people are transphobes that are against this, and it's the right wing racist bigots and the white men. And then, of course, it's the racist white right wing bigots and the white men that are friendly and accepting to victims of this cult. And so when the cultists see detransitioners, speaking about this, and the only media that will talk about it is right wing, that reinforces their beliefs even more. And I know right now with Trump getting elected, the cult is panicking. They are panicking that their, elixirs are going to be taken away from them, their magic potions. Um, and they see these detransitioners like myself. I did a Trump campaign ad that was texted and emailed out to demographics that might be on the fence. And so some of them were actually trans identified people, and I saw some Reddit forums discussing and complaining about my ad. And they're like, oh, these right-wing detrans grifters are promoting Trump, and that makes me scared because it's making me question the ideology.
Wow.
And the other cultists, what do they say? They say, "Oh, well, that's just your internalized transphobia." So no matter what, any dissent is internalized transphobia. It's doubt, right? It's
Right,
non-faith.
right.
It's non-belief.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to say that, and they're wrong in a way, because I knocked my district. I ran for Iowa House District 27 this last race. I didn't win. It was a close race. It was a tough race. It's a tough district, very, a little bit purple, but I knocked thousands of doors and I talked to, hundreds and hundreds of Democrats, independents, and Republicans. And I have friends that are Democrats too. And none of them that I know really believe that minors should be having surgeries and being medicalized. None of the Democrats I personally know. So there's a kind of a disconnect that I don't think they really understand how prevalent the issue is, and they don't quite believe that their elected representatives are voting in lockstep on all this stuff. So I think that we're kind of 80% in alignment, and there's just been such a concerted effort in their leadership and in the legacy media to divide people on the issue. And one of the ways they do that, I believe, is they lump the LGB in with the TQ plus IA stuff. And people get confused by that. They think flying the trans cult flag means they're supporting the gay community. And I have gay friends that do not support transing kids, and they want to be left alone. They're like, no, we're not on board with this stuff. I mean, I had a friend who's a Democrat that's a lesbian that worked on my campaign because we connected on our, wanting to protect kids from these terrible issues.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the majority of Americans don't agree with these things. And if you sit down and have a conversation, again, these are not the radical activists, right? There are a few vocal radical activists that are highly left, they're communists, they're Marxist, and they believe all this stuff fully. And then they rally all of the normal people that think they're just being good liberals or good Democrats. They don't really understand, the average person doesn't understand how perverted the far left is, or the queer is, or the trans is. And I think there is a PR problem with the gender critical movement that, the mainstream media has suppressed it, and, they use it for talking points, and a lot of us are, classical liberal people that might actually hold a diverse range of views, but they paint all of us as, far right conservative evangelical Christians. I wouldn't say I'm any of those things. And, regardless of affiliation, it would be nice to talk about, the actual facts of the experiences that have happened. But obviously, for PR reasons, the left isn't going to allow that. And so we just have this continuation of, misinformation. And, you'll see a one headline that spooks, because you have to remember that a lot of the people in the cult are they're very mentally ill, right? And they're very fragile, they're in survival mode, they're nihilistic, and they don't have the bandwidth to think critically. And I know that sounds kind of like just jeering at them, or talking about their intelligence, but it's not that they're unintelligent, it's that they're in survival mode. Someone like me who is, intelligent and obviously now has like a critical thinking skills and everything, back then that was shut down. If you're in survival mode, you don't have access to the exploratory system where you're going to be seeking out new information, seeking out diverse viewpoints. It doesn't feel safe. If you don't even feel safe in your own body or mind, you don't have the energy to question, what you're being fed. And it's very unfortunate because a lot of these people are like myself and my peers. They're very empathetic, they're very thoughtful, they want to do the right thing. And if given the proper information, they would have integrity and they would stand up to injustice. And so we see detransitioners going from these like far left communists, like, let's get justice and all that kind of stuff, to then realizing, oh, that's actually the injustice. And then they switch their efforts to a more realistic and facts based approach to life, which is to become, anti that, because it actually is harming people and it's not liberatory. So
Yeah, and I think they've done a disservice to people that are compassionate. They've really taken advantage of compassionate people. And I always, when I talk to people about it, it's like there's different reasons that people are transing their kids or supporting, the trans cult. And sometimes there's a portion of those people that it just really comes from ignorant compassion. And if I was a young guy, I know, I mean, I wore tie-dyed t-shirts and had long hair and probably was a little bit liberal. I might have been holding a sign until I figured it out. I mean, it's because, compassionate people want to help and they want to stand up for the underdog. And so, but they really should do the research and be open to the dialogue. That's what's important, is to be able to have that intelligent dialogue and really, okay, what really causes the most suffering? What really eases the most suffering? To me, it's pretty black and white. I mean, in the long term, you know, giving into that somebody's delusion is not what's going to cause the least suffering. It's going to cause more suffering in the long run. So if people really want to be compassionate and ease suffering, they will help somebody have alignment with their body, find out what the underlying causes are, and help them live a long and happy life, even if they, they may be gay or something like that, but they're at least not mutilating themselves. They can express themselves in many different ways without medicalizing and mutilating themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So 10 months. What have you been doing the last 10 months since we
Oh
saw you
my God.
last?
10 months, man. Oh man. The biggest change for me was that I finally completed my dream of moving out of my hometown and birthplace of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I moved to the city of my choice, which was Phoenix, Arizona. And that was a transcendental change. Understandably, it brought up a lot of trauma. It brought up a lot of, existential anxiety. It's like, all right, I've started my life over, but in some ways, like, most things aren't starting over. Like the past is still real, and PTSD is still a thing. So it was a huge change. But I've been here 6 months now, and I'm loving it. It was a good change, and a lot of growth comes from voluntary acceptance of stress and confronting our fears and knowing that if we do hard work, that it'll pay off. And so, yeah, that's been a big part of the last 10 months. And I've written and edited the majority of my book also, which is another huge project. It's the biggest project I've ever done,
I
you
was
know.
honored that you sent me a chapter for review.
Yeah.
And I tell you, it was amazing. I mean, I
Oh, well,
love
thank you.
how, one, it's raw, two, you really get into the nitty gritty of it. And it's almost got that Catcher in the Rye feel where you're telling the truth from your perspective. And I can't wait to read the whole thing.
Well, thank you. I mean, I view this book as a case study in an existential situation, right? I mean, it's really a coming of age story. Like this could be a fictional story that is a coming of age sort of novel coming into womanhood. How do you date? How do you deal with your family? How do you heal from your childhood? These are all existential themes, but then it's specifically a case study of this egregious modern, medical scandal and this horrific situation that this kind of archetypal figure. I'm the protagonist in the book, obviously, but y- this archetypal type of girl who's kind of quirky, kind of smart, kind of rebellious, finds herself on the wrong path to transcendence. And then how do I heal from that? How do I heal from trauma? And then coming of age, how do I accept my womanhood? How do I accept my body after what's been done to me? How do I transcend that and become the woman that I was always meant to be? Um, I don't want to be too dramatic about my own life, but it's kind of an epic story.
It
It's
is.
a very transcendental sort of experience, existentially. And I think I try to pack as much wisdom as I can in there, about trauma and healing and relationships and God and all these different things, just it's really a lot in there, but threaded through this gender madness.
I think it's going to be epic. I mean, the thing that it has that these other books don't is the personal story and people want to read that. They want to understand who you are, what you went through, and then they can. I mean, those are the stories that change people, and maybe someone else who's confused and reading your book, it'll help them. Whereas, these other books like The Gender Trap, it's like a textbook, with tons of science and data and studies and cite, they're all cited. Or Miriam Grossman's book, Lost in Translation, it's a great book, especially for parents and people in the community that want to learn about that. But I can see, young adults picking your book up and saying, "Oh yeah, okay, I've felt this, I've experienced this, I understand where she's going, and maybe I'm on the wrong path."
Yeah, I mean, I have the highest respect for those types of books that really go into the research, because I am not a math person and I'm an artist, and I'm like, can someone else just do the stats and I'll just like write the prose, you
Right.
know? So I'm very grateful to books like that, because I'll have my case study, this narrative, and then a resource list for further exploration. And it's like, okay, I understand this is an anecdotal experience. If you have more questions, that's great. Here, now check out these other titles where you can read about the facts and some more of the history, that I don't have time to get into all of that, and vice versa. Someone reads these facts and they're like, it's kind of detached and intellectualized. Okay, now let's read this raw, experience of this life story. I think we need both. And my book is written, mostly for those that are already skeptical, at least, and if not critical of the ideology. But it's also, it's a detrans story, but it's also a trans story. Like, it is this very similar experience to that of a trans person, right? It's very archetypal of that type. And so, although it's not specifically geared towards people that are still in transition, I would very much hope that there would be an openness to some of it. And I understand a lot of them won't be open because, I'm a right wing bigot who voted for Trump and whatever. But like, it's the same story. Like, we're all quirky kids that are just trying to, you know, deal with our eccentricities, and we wear weird clothes, and we're, looking at the same websites and having the same sense of humor and all those types of things. So I do hope that it reaches families and it reaches parents who might be able to understand their child better, understand their personality, and maybe model to them, and say, hey, there's this girl, there's this woman that is so similar to you. Like, here's her story. I have parents that already kind of do that, but it's hard because a lot of parents want their kid to talk to me, understandably. And I'm like, having a long-term relationship with someone or trying to like intervene in a stranger's life is a lot more difficult than once I have this book, I can just say, here's this one thing, here's this one resource that has everything in it, has all my wisdoms. Please take this. And if your kid is willing to read it, or at least if you'll read it, then you can see, plant those seeds. And then maybe in the future, that kid, I mean, it would be so rewarding if someone gave their teenager my book, and then a couple years later, the teen reached out to me and was like, "Damn, Laura, you were right about everything, and I've really modeled myself after you." I have had a couple teens that have done that just through some of my other resources. And obviously their parents get the credit for helping them to desist and everything, not me. But um, I can foresee that happening, where maybe even trans identified people will be like, wow, I have an extremely similar life to Laura, and here's how she got her shit together and didn't need to do these things to her body, or at least keep doing them.
It's going to
you know
happen.
I would hope.
It's going to happen. And when that first person reaches out to you, you're going to say that was worth all the work. I mean, I know that's how it's going to be. I wrote The Way, a Small Book of Wisdom. You've read that book,
Yeah.
and I've had people reach out to me and say, "Man, I lost 6 people in a year's period, and your book helped me get through it." And I
Mm.
told my wife, "Well, there it is. That all the work was worth it just to help that one person get through whatever they were going through." And I know your book's going to be huge because it's such a on fire topic, and I don't think I've heard of anything written in the way that you're writing your book. What's the name of it?
Surviving the trans myth.
Surviving the Trans Myth. And when will it be published?
I'm aiming for in the later half of this year.
No pressure. We just want to read it soon.
I know, I want you guys to read it so bad. Everyone's asking, and I'm like, I'm working on it, guys. Like, it's my life story. It's hard to relive some of this, and then editing the intellectual stuff to like summarize my entire life's work of, my own wisdom. Like, it's
Well,
worth it just for me to like be like, oh yeah, like, okay, I have gotten my shit together. Like, I'm not that like abused little kid anymore. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
Will you attempt to do the Audible version yourself, or will you get some famous narrator?
Oh, I'll definitely do it myself.
Good,
I
good.
do music production and all that, so I'm like,
I
oh, it's
love
gonna
it
be
when
so much
people do
work.
that. Have you read Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey?
No.
Oh, he did the Audible version. It's really great the way he
I mean,
does
and
it.
he's an actor too, so
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that's I mean, I'll definitely try to like if anyone like I'm not really an actor, but I'm interested in performance, but like it's my own life, so I should be able to like reenact,
Yeah.
my own emotions and stuff.
Awesome. I can't wait. We were going to talk about the Daily Wire. You have a documentary or something
Yeah, a
coming out with a day.
documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a really exciting documentary. I think this will probably be the biggest documentary to date about gender ideology. It's called Identity Crisis. It was produced by Turning Point USA, and then it was bought and is going to be released by the Daily Wire. So it's definitely, I've been in several smaller, they were really good films, but they were, very independent, more lower budget, didn't have the distribution and reach. I think this is going to be the biggest one. It's being released for free live on X on January 10th on the Daily Wire account. And then
Wow.
it'll be available on Daily Wire Plus for purchase on January 13th. So it's coming up literally in 2 days. Literally in 2
Wow.
days it'll be released, yeah.
Well, I'm going to have to get this out quicker then. Yeah, that's exciting. I love the Daily Wire. They have some good productions for sure. So, Dr. James Lindsay, is he in it?
Yeah, James Lindsay's in it, I'm in it, Chloe Cole's in it, a lot of different voices are in it, parents, therapists, school people, I guess those would be called teachers, school people, and then there's also primarily, I mean, it's very comprehensive, it goes into the ideology, the grooming, but then the primary case studies are me as a detransitioner, and then Adam Vina, a dad who lost custody of his young son in the California legal system because he wouldn't transition his son when he was only about 5 years old, and he still has no real contact with his son. It's a horrible story, and so there's some hope in it, like with my story, but then it goes into the really dark side of things with the reality of there's still so many families struggling, like Adam.
That's terrible. So, they took his kid and transitioned him without his consent.
Yeah, the mother is kind of that classic Transhausen mother, and so she has full custody of the son. Adam's not allowed to contact his son. And right now, the son is too young to be put on puberty blockers, but he's not going to have any contact as is with his son. And it's very likely that his son will be put on puberty blockers and estrogen, and he can't do anything about it because the California legal system views non affirmation of gender identity as child abuse.
It should be exactly the opposite. It
Right.
should be the exactly the opposite. It's just so bizarre.
Well, there might be some hope for Adam, if we can get a federal ban, and then the states will end up suing, the federal government, and then it'll be taken to the Supreme Court, and then hopefully the Supreme Court will rule in the favor of the federal ban, and then, we might have to see if we can actually, ensure that these states are following the federal rules. California is going to be a battleground for this sort of thing, but there's some hope with the Trump administration doing a federal ban.
Yeah, I hope that works out well, and I hope the Supreme Court holds that up. I watched the documentary, and there was a young mother whose daughter was taken from her that wanted to transition, and she wouldn't affirm her new name and new pronouns. And then she worked hard to try to, they took her and put her in a group home. You probably know the story.
Mhm.
And the girl, they gave her testosterone, etc., and she ended up, it messed her up so much that she threw herself in front of a train and killed herself. And the mother hadn't been able to see her but like 1 hour a week for, weeks at a time.
Mhm.
She got some time to visit her, and she had to completely affirm her new gender and her new pronouns and buy her boys clothes and all these things. And the treatment pushed this girl over the edge, especially with all the testosterone raging through her body and everything.
Yeah, that was it's just a horrific case. And I think I have met the mother one time. And it's just the grief. It's this grief that's never gonna go away. Obviously I understand that to some extent as someone who lives with the mutilation done, but I'm also still alive, and I also have the chance to be a mother and to live the rest of my life. But for the parents that lose their kids, I mean, again, that's what the lies are all around, with the suicide myth, that parents are just worried that they're going to lose their kids forever, that they're going to die by suicide. So when we see these unnecessary deaths caused by, interference in the parental relationship, um it's infuriating. And I hope it motivates everyone to fight for truth and fight for each other's kids. I mean, what else do we have?
Well, I think there's a lot of hope. There's so many more people are standing up and speaking out, and I think feel more comfortable in just saying, okay, this is not right. It's not common sense. We need to, stand up against this. And so many people, I mean, like Rogan and all the different podcasters now that have millions of followers, and they're speaking out against it too. And now we have a new administration that's not going to be pushing that agenda, like the last administration was so hard. And I don't really understand. They were trying to appeal to such a small minority, um, and then it backfired on them big time. I didn't they um, drop the Title IX change they were trying to pass. They were trying to add.
Um,
Gender identity to Title IX, which was protecting women's rights for so long in sports and education.
yeah, I'm unclear if they did get that added or if it was just spoken about, but the Biden administration definitely hitched themselves to a dying cause. And I know that there was a Trump campaign ad that ran just on the basis that, Biden wants like men and women sports and men and women spaces and stuff. And that was an extremely high performing ad, um, that apparently had a lot of sway. And then I know Kamala and others were complaining about it and being like, oh, that was a cheap shot. They're exploiting these vulnerable trans people and all that. The reality is Americans just know that men and women are different and you can't change sex. And men, especially, are tired of being told otherwise. And men obviously showed up, and women as well. And we voted, and I feel pretty happy about the outcome.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to be a great 4 years. It's looking forward to it. So, how can people reach you, Laura? Where can they find you and hear about updates on your book and all the things you're doing to protect young women's rights?
Yeah, I mainly hang out where all the cool kids hang out, which is on X. You can find me at Laura Becker Real, as in Laura Becker, as in real Laura Becker. Just look up Laura Becker and you'll find me pretty much on any platform. I also have a YouTube channel under Laura Becker where I post interviews and vlogs, and I'm doing more long form psychoeducational content. I also have a Substack. Um, and if you have specific questions or would like to connect with me for an event or advice or other things, you can feel free to email me, laurabeckerofficial@gmail.com. I'm very open. I always just put myself out there and I'm like, whatever the universe brings to me, and I can give back as much as I can.
Well, send me all your links and I'll put them in the description and make
Yeah,
sure
for
people
sure.
know how to reach you because you made a big impact here. Every time you show up and speak and especially talk with lawmakers. And I always send these podcasts to all the representatives and senators that I work with, and I know they appreciate it. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing your journey over the next year, and we'll keep in contact and update our listeners as well. So thank you so much. God bless you.
Oh, thank you, Oliver. God bless you.
Yep, you have a great day. We'll talk soon.
All right. Bye.